Hey kids, welcome to Andrew Jackson Storytime. We're moving forward after James Monroe in the era of good feelings when the country was rolling. Again, John Quincy Adams took over for 4 years, but then the people elected someone brand new to be president of the United States, Andrew Jackson, and he was a president unlike any other before. So today we're going to start the story Andrew Jackson, the seventh president. Follow along with me. So, Andrew Jackson was the seventh president of the United States. He was born in the Waxhaw region, an area along the border between North Carolina and South Carolina, in 1767. Jackson was one of the roughest, toughest presidents ever. Andrew Jackson was the first president to grow up poor and without an expensive education. The first 6 U.S. presidents all came from pretty wealthy families. All except George Washington were highly educated, too. The Waxhaw region where Andrew grew up was a rugged backwoods area. At that time, the Carolinas were part of the 13 colonies in North America that were ruled by Great Britain. Andrew lived in a log cabin with his mother and 2 brothers. It's a pretty good story so far. Now, Andrew Jackson's father died just a few days before Andrew Jackson was born. Mrs. Jackson had to work very hard to raise her 3 sons alone. She hoped Andrew would become a minister someday. She saved every bit of extra money to send Andrew to the best school in the area. Andrew didn't really care about school, though. He was a good reader, but was more interested in running and jumping, contests, horseback riding, hunting, and especially fighting. Worst of all, hot-tempered Andrew Jackson swore a lot. Andrew Jackson was growing up during a very exciting time. In 1775, when Andrew was 8 years old, the people of the American colonies began fighting the Revolutionary War, a war of independence against Great Britain and the King of England. By the time British soldiers reached the Waxhaw region, Andrew was 13 years old. Andrew and his 2 older brothers volunteered to join the American Army right away. So Andrew Jackson served in the Revolutionary War. Now, despite the fighting, Andrew and his brother Robert were captured by British soldiers. An officer who wanted his boots cleaned demanded that Andrew do the job. When Andrew refused, the British officer slashed him with his sword, leaving bad cuts on Andrew's hand and face. Andrew Jackson never forgot this. He hated the British for the rest of his life. The Revolutionary War was very tragic for Andrew Jackson. By the time it ended, both of his brothers and his mother had died. At the age of 15, Andrew was both a war veteran and an orphan. Andrew Jackson spent his time as a teenager moving from relative to relative. He started hanging out around with some bad kids who liked to drink, gamble, play pranks on people. One of their favorite pranks was to dig up an outhouse and drag it to an unexpected place. After a while, Andrew figured there must be something better he could do with his life. He decided to return to school. Andrew studied hard and even ended up teaching for a while. You're still with us, yes? Oh, good. Eventually, Andrew Jackson became a lawyer. In 1788, when he was 21 years old, he headed west to make his fortune. Andrew thought he could help bring law and order to the untamed wilderness areas of Tennessee while helping settlers start up their new businesses. Andrew rented a room in the house of the Donaldson family in Nashville, Tennessee. The Donaldsons were one of the richest families around. It wasn't long before Andrew fell in love with one of the Donaldson daughters, Rachel. Rachel was beautiful and was a great horseback rider and singer. Rachel even smoked a corncob pipe. In 1792, Andrew and Rachel got married. Andrew became a successful frontier lawyer. Because a lot of people he helped didn't have money, he was often paid in cotton, whiskey, slaves, land, or farm animals. Andrew and Rachel were able to start up a large plantation. Backwoods settlers really appreciated Andrew's help and the fair way he treated them. After a few years, Andrew was elected to represent his state in Congress. He later became a judge in the Superior Court of Tennessee. Andrew Jackson ran his court in a tough, no-nonsense way. He settled problems quickly and usually kept a pistol or two by his side. Because of his rugged frontier upbringing, Andrew Jackson was used to settling his problems with a gun. Andrew Jackson's talent for fighting came in handy when the United States went to war with Britain again in 1812. For years, the British Navy had been stopping American ships and kidnapping sailors for its own crews. At the same time, American settlers were beginning to move into the areas where American Indians lived. The British started supplying some American Indians with weapons so they could force American settlers out of Indian territory. In 1813, Andrew Jackson was asked to command an army of volunteers to defeat the Creek Indians. Even though Andrew Jackson had bullets left in him from a previous duel and a tavern fight, he and his men beat the Creek Indians badly. Two of Andrew's volunteer fighters were the famous frontiersmen Davy Crockett and Sam Houston. After fighting the Creeks, Andrew Jackson led his troops to victory in what would become known as the Battle of New Orleans. Andrew knew he would be greatly outnumbered by British soldiers. He quickly gathered some of the best and most unusual fighters to help his army of volunteers. Former slaves, Creoles, backwoodsmen, wealthy businessmen, Indians, and even pirates all offered to help General Andrew Jackson. Many of these volunteers were the best shots around. By the time the fighting was ended, the British had lost almost 2,000 men. The Americans had only lost 13. Andrew Jackson had won an almost impossible battle. He suddenly became a national hero. Because Andrew Jackson was such a courageous military leader and always looked out for the safety of his troops, his men nicknamed him Old Hickory. Hickory wood was the toughest thing they ever knew of. It wasn't long before some people began to think Andrew Jackson would make a good president. And that's where we stop for today, my friends. Andrew Jackson's early childhood. How would you describe it in poetry form? Oh boy.